The Blackwood Range did not welcome visitors. It merely tolerated them. Elias hauled his pack higher on his shoulders, the nylon straps groaning under the weight of his field recording gear. He was a man who lived through his ears, a professional Foley artist and acoustic ecologist who viewed the world as a series of frequencies. Beside him, Jax was the visual counterpoint, a Nikon dangling from his neck, his eyes constantly scanning the canopy for a break in the gray light. They had come for the Blackwood Silence, a local phenomenon where, for reasons geologists and biologists couldn't agree on, the valley seemed to swallow sound. "Check the levels again," Jax said. His voice felt strangely flat, as if the air were too thick to carry the vibration. Elias pulled the handheld recorder from his hip holster. The digital needles on the screen were dancing, despite the fact that, to his ears, the forest was tomb quiet. "It's peaking," Elias muttered, frowning. "I'm getting a high-frequency hum at about 18 kilohertz. It's constant. But I can't hear a damn thing." "Maybe it's the wind in the needles," Jax suggested, though the hemlock stood as still as iron bars. "No, it's too rhythmic. It's like a pulse." They pushed deeper. By mile 6, the subtle wrongness began to manifest in the biology of the place. Elias stopped to record a lone thrush perched on a low branch. He held the shotgun mic steady. The bird opened its beak, but the sound that came out wasn't a song. It was a 3-second clip of a car door slamming. Thump clack. The bird repeated it. Thump clack. "Did you hear that?" Jax whispered, his face pale. "It's a mimic," Elias said, though his heart was beginning to trip. Some birds can imitate mechanical sounds if they live near roads. "Elias, the nearest road is 20 miles behind us. And that sounded exactly like the door on my Ford." They pushed the thought away, chalking it up to the auditory illusions often cited in trekking journals about Blackwood. But as the sun began to dip, the woods moved from strange to predatory. By 8 p.m., they had established camp in a natural clearing. The fire was a struggle. The wood was dry, but seemed resistant to heat, as if the chemical process of combustion was being slowed by the environment itself. Elias set his primary recorder on a flat stone. "I'm going to run a continuous loop tonight. If there's a localized acoustic anomaly, I want the raw data." They ate in a silence that felt heavy, almost pressurized. Every time Jax shifted his weight or Elias cleared his throat, the sound seemed to linger in the air a fraction of a second too long, a ghost of an echo that shouldn't exist in an open forest. "I'm going to piss," Jax said, standing up. He wandered toward the edge of the light, his silhouette blurring into the tree line. Elias watched the fire. He felt a strange sensation in his teeth, a vibration, like a tuning fork held against his jaw. He reached for the recorder to check the gain. Suddenly, a voice drifted down from the ridge above them. "Jax, come look at this. You won't believe the color of the water." Elias bolted upright. The voice was his. Not just a mimicry. It was his exact resonance, the specific way his breath hitched before the word color. But he hadn't spoken. He hadn't even thought those words. "Elias." Jax emerged from the darkness on the opposite side of the camp, looking toward the ridge. "Was that you?" "I'm right here," Elias said, his voice trembling. I didn't say anything. It sounded like you were right above me, Jack said, stumbling back into the firelight. But it sounded polished, like you were speaking through a high-end condenser mic. Elias grabbed the recorder. His hands were shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. He hit stop, then navigated to the last recorded file. He plugged in his monitoring headphones, pressing them tight against his ears. He heard the crackle of the fire. He heard Jax's footsteps walking away. Then he heard a segment of audio that made his skin crawl. On the tape, he heard himself and Jax having an argument. I told you not to follow it, Jax's voice screamed through the headphones. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. I told you it wasn't me, Elias. Why didn't you look at my hands? Elias ripped the headphones off. We didn't say this. We haven't said this yet. What are you talking about? Jack snatched the device. He listened for 10 seconds before his face went the color of ash. That's my voice. But I'm not crying. Why am I crying on the tape? It's a pre-echo, Elias whispered, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. The Blackwood silence isn't an absence of sound. It's a temporal displacement. The forest is recording us, Jax, but it's playing back the files before they've been created. The panic set in at 11 p.m. They decided to leave their gear, everything except the recorder and their lights, and hike back the way they came. But the trail was gone. In its place was a corridor of trees that looked like a mirror image of the path they had walked. Left, Jax insisted. The creek was to the left. They turned left, only to find themselves standing in front of their own campfire. The embers were still glowing. The recorder was back on the stone, even though Elias was sure he had put it in his pocket. We're looping, Jax gasped. He pulled his flashlight to scan the perimeter, but the beam caught something leaning against a tree. It was a yellow flashlight. Jax looked at the light in his hand. Then he looked at the one against the tree. He walked over and picked it up. It was his, the same scratches, the same JV on the base. But the one in his hand felt lighter. He looked at his fingers. The skin around his fingernails was beginning to blur. The cuticles were vanishing, the flesh smoothing over the nail bed like melting wax. Elias, Jax whispered, his voice cracking. Look at my hands. Elias didn't look. He couldn't. He was staring at the digital recorder. The screen was flickering, the time code jumping forward in jagged leaps. 02:14分0一秒到03点10 5分20而秒到04点10分0秒 We have to break the script, Elias said, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. The tape says you cry. It says I follow a voice to the water. If we don't do it, if we stay perfectly still, maybe the loop breaks. I can't stay still, Jax whined. He was scratching at his hands, but there was nothing to scratch. His fingers were becoming smooth, rounded nubs. The perfect Jax was being drafted, and the original was the rough sketch being erased. From the darkness, a new sound emerged. It wasn't a voice this time. It was the sound of a flare gun. Whoosh! I have the flare gun, Elias said, reaching into his side pocket. It was gone. His pocket had sealed shut, the fabric becoming a single, continuous sheet of nylon. A red light blossomed in the sky above the ridge. The recording just played the flare, Elias said, his voice becoming eerily calm as the perfect Elias began to take over his psyche. Which means we've already fired it, which means we've already gone to the ridge. I'm not going, Jack sobbed. It was the exact sob from the recording. The pitch, the cadence, the wetness of the intake of breath. He was hitting his marks. He was becoming the audio. They didn't walk to the ridge. The ridge came to them. The ground tilted, the trees thinned, and suddenly they were standing on the edge of a black, oily fissure. It wasn't water. It was a hole in the world, filled with the substance that drank the light of their headlamps. Standing on the other side were the refined. They were beautiful. The Elias thing and the Jax thing stood with military posture. Their skin was like alabaster. Their clothes lacked a single wrinkle or speck of trail dust. They were the studio versions of two broken men. The Elias thing held up its hand. It was a nightmare of geometry, smooth, nailless, and terrifyingly clean. The digital recorder in Elias's hand spoke one last time. It didn't play a recording of the past or the future. It played the sound of a heart stopping, a single long tone of static. "Why didn't you look at my hands?" the Jax thing asked. It didn't use its mouth. The sound came from the air inside Jax's own lungs. The real Jax looked down. His hands were gone. His arms ended in smooth, rounded stumps of pale flesh. He tried to scream, but his mouth had smoothed over, his lips fusing into a seamless mask of skin. Elias felt the change. His ears, his most precious tools, were failing. The world was becoming silent, not because the sound was gone, but because he was no longer a creature that needed to hear. He was being edited. The ums, the ahs, the coughs, the ragged breaths, all the noise of being human was being stripped away. The two refined stepped across the black liquid, walking on the surface as if it were glass. They reached out and touched the foreheads of their counterparts. The transition was silent. At 6 a.m., two men walked out of the Blackwood Range. They moved with a synchronized rhythmic grace. They didn't speak, for there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been recorded. Their packs were light, for they no longer required food or water. When they reached the trailhead, a park ranger waved at them. "Rough night?" he asked. The man who looked like Elias turned and smiled. It was a perfect smile. "It was very quiet," he said. His voice was a masterpiece of acoustics, rich, resonant, and entirely devoid of a soul. Back in the woods, by a dying fire that left no ash, a digital recorder sat on a stone. If anyone were to find it and hit play, they would hear the sound of two men screaming. But the screaming would be played in reverse, turning the agony into a beautiful, haunting melody that sounded exactly like the wind through the hemlocks.